is hand out our carnations. So I'm wondering, before we go any further, if Ethan and Noah and Logan would want to come back up for a moment. Would you want to come back up for a minute? Any women? All mothers of spirit here today. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
It's a nice tradition.
We have some good workers here. I hope I say this right, but I was just remembering I had this puzzle I put together once, and it was a puzzle of an work of art by Diego Rivera. Does that sound right, Margaret?
That's right.
And he had this picture of a woman working, so she was bent over because she was working hard. But the thing she was carrying was it was either a basket or
It was a basket.
wrapped around, right? So there was something wrapped around it, but it had flowers in it, and it was about how beautiful work can be. That we can really enjoy what we do, and the flowers symbolize the beauty of the work. I always like that. So I thank you for our workers today. Well, I don't know if you noticed the story on the back of your bulletin yet, but I saw this little story and I thought I would include it because it made me chuckle, and so I'm going to read it. Aunt Karen is the mother of two high-spirited young girls. When I called her one morning, our conversation was constantly interrupted by the din of kids screaming and chasing each other. "Could you hold on for a moment?" that my aunt finally asked, putting down the phone. Within 10 seconds, all I could hear was absolute silence. Then, "Okay, I'm back." "But it's so quiet," I exclaimed. "You must have complete control over those two." "Not really," my aunt confessed wearily. "I'm in the closet." So parenting can definitely be a challenge on some days. We know that. I was remembering that when before we had our two children, one of my brothers said to me, he said, being a parent is the greatest thing you'll ever do, and it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. So it's the greatest thing you'll ever do, and it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. And so, without diminishing at all the blessings that come with being a parent and all that entails, I'm just wondering, what do you think from your own experience of being a parent, or from what you can think about your own mom and dad's experience of being a parent? What do you think is the hardest part of being a parent? Or one of the hardest parts?
Letting them go.
Telling them no? I know what you mean.
And letting them go.
And letting them go. And Linda said that too, right? Letting them go.
And the empty house when they do go.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and having adult children that you don't parent the same way.
Mm-hmm.
You have to watch them make mistakes.
Mhm.
but you have to let them do that.
Holding on to your patience.
Holding on to your patience. Mm-hmm. Well, those are all answers I can identify with, and I'm sure I will see as we get older, as the children get older, what it's like as you move into the different stages of parenting, and then finally when they're older and how that changes. I'm not so sure Mom was upset with the emptiness syndrome. But we'll see how that is. So there's all of that. There's the letting go, the patience, all of that. And I was wondering if maybe worry is a part of that. That can be one of the hard things too, is just worrying and hoping the best for them and hoping that they're going to do well, and maybe even sometimes it's finances. Maybe that's sometimes too hard when you want to make everything happen. As I was noting that this was going to be Mother's Day and just thinking about what it means to be a caregiver, I pulled a book off of my shelf. It was called Sacred Parenting by an author named Gary Thomas, and I was flipping through it and I happened to stumble upon the chapter on sacrifice. And as I was looking at the page, he quoted this line from the Gospels that we heard. If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. If anyone, parents included, caregivers, would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. And while this is Mother's Day and we might think specifically about that part of life, also we are all called to be caregivers and caretakers. And if we remember the Lord's commandments, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like unto it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. So we're all, in a sense, filled with that spirit, or can be, and are asked to be, filled with that mothering, fathering, loving spirit. So what does that mean when you take those two verses then and put them together? What does it mean when you are called to be a caregiver? And if you would come after me, you must deny yourself and take up your cross daily and follow me. So the question is, what are we giving up? What are we denying of ourselves that is involved in being a parent?
Put yourself first.
Right. And that's really the heart of where I was going. Because there's you can have all these personal ambitions and goals and a way that you saw yourself before you had someone to take care of. But all of that has to adjust and change. And is it, sometimes they might think I have to give up something, but it's not just for the sake of giving something up, and it's not always something, you don't even have to think about this as something that you really love that you have to give up, in the sense of, I just don't have enough time for myself, or things like that. But what about if Jesus is talking about something that you should give up, because it would really benefit us to give it up, and then parenting or taking care of others is really just a way of this kind of form of spiritual training to do that thing. So what is it that we need to give up? And Jean, she went right to the heart of the matter, is thinking about ourselves first. So in this book on sacred parenting, there was this story. He shared this. He said, there was a deacon named John Adams a common farmer and a shoemaker in the 18th century. He lived by a simple belief: the only true sound investment is land. Once purchased, land should never be sold. Historians believe Deacon John made just one exception to this rule. He sold 10 acres to send his oldest son, also named John, to college. Although he broke an important rule to himself, Deacon John willingly made that sacrifice in order to give his son the best chance at success. And the son John didn't waste his father's sacrifice. He eventually became the second president of the United States. So the only way John Adams, or one of the only ways, was able to get an education and rise to become one of the most influential men in his day is because his father put aside something that he thought was really important and gave so that his son could have a leg up in the world. And then President John Adams wrote this: "I must study politics and war, that my sons may have liberty to study mathematics and philosophy. My sons ought to study mathematics and philosophy, geography, natural history, naval architecture, navigation, commerce, and agriculture, in order to give their children a right to study paintings and poetry and music and architecture and porcelain." And he goes on. And we could add spirituality to that list because it's such a beautiful image of a parent wanting to do what they can so that the next generation's life is even better. And isn't that what being a real caregiver is about? Is when we can stop thinking that our dreams begin and end with us, and that what's really important is that the person that we care about is going to have a chance for a life that is even going to be fuller and more beautiful and closer to God than what ours can be. I couldn't help but think of what happened with John the Baptist. If you remember, the disciples that were John the Baptist came to him wondering who Jesus really was and what he was doing and why he was baptizing and what was happening. And he says to them, he says, "I am not the Christ, but I was sent ahead of him. I am just a friend who attends the bridegroom." And he said, "That joy is mine now that he's here. And this is what I love." He said, "He must become greater, I must become less. He must become greater, I must become less." And isn't that true? That we want God's presence to be greater in our lives, but also for our children's lives? There's such a call to humility here. And I was remembering a quote I recently read in Swedenborg's work on divine providence. And he said this, he said, "The hardest battle of all is with our love of being in control because of our sense of self-importance." The hardest battle of all is with our love of being in control because of our sense of self-importance. But if we can overcome this, he says we have no trouble overcoming all of those other things in our life. But this is like the head of them all, trying to move past this. And so maybe this is what the Lord is saying. If you follow me, you'll have to give up something of yourself. And it's going to be thinking of our self-importance.
Daily.
Daily. Right, daily. And we may not see this struggle in big events in our life, but I wonder even in little events. If that's maybe where we find that constant battle. And I want to differentiate between knowing that a parent does have to have what some people call self-care and needs that time to be renewed. And also not giving your child everything they ever want. But also, what about the little moments when you have a temptation to either turn on the television or play a board game with somebody who wants to play with you? Or sometimes I see a lot of texting. It's something I've been trying to watch in myself too. What about the temptation to text instead of paying attention fully to the children that you're taking care of? I mean, little ways, I wonder if we see that where it's almost easier, or there's almost a desire to step back into that time before we had children. Because we want to do what we want to do. But the heart of the matter, the overall issue is, over a course of a whole life, what will our story reveal in terms of our devotion to God, to wanting to care for one another, and how much we can give up of that, of ourself, and if that self is that feeling of being self-important. In the one of the things about, we mentioned the word sacrifice several times, and one of the things I like to think about is that at its root, we often think about sacrifice to give up something, but at its root, it just meant to make sacred. So if you remember any of the Old Testament laws, it was about bringing that perfect lamb or that perfect animal. It wasn't about bringing an imperfect, it was about bringing the best you had to make sacred. So I'm wondering, or a good question to leave us with, is what is the best of ourselves that we can bring to our role as caregivers? Whether it's grandparents, whether it's parents, moms and dads, whether it's students we take care of, or whether it's whatever it is that our energy goes toward. And in a way, if we return to that baseball analogy for a moment, we're all up at the plate. You know, we're all up at the plate, and there's always that ball coming towards us. There's always that opportunity, and the question is, what are we going to do with it? And what kind of a play are we going to make? And maybe what we can bring to the plate is to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. May the Lord help us with this.